Official announcers are now asking the participants to take their seats ahead of the beginning of the official ceremony. People have mostly arrived at this point, including Alex Traiman. Hi, Alex.
Hi, Erin. So nice to be here.
I'll bet. How was the march this year?
Well, the march, I think, was very special. Definitely took on a totally different meaning just 7 months after October 7th. This was the first topic that was on everybody's minds. And you'd think that there would be a feeling of depression. Seeing the death camp at Auschwitz and here at Birkenau, and knowing that the same hatred that fueled the Holocaust just 80 years ago is fueling the enemies of the Jewish people today as well. But surprisingly, I didn't find even one depressed person throughout the entire march. It was a very joyous march. There were tons of smiles, tons of singing of Am Yisrael Chai. People just felt like a real spirit that the Jewish people live, and that these moments, that the Holocaust, that October 7th are moments that are part of our history, but they're moments that really just make the Jewish people stronger somehow or another, even if they don't understand why.
How very meaningful that really is. And of course, we saw some of that ourselves as we were watching the incredible spirit. Now, of course, today's events actually began in Budapest last night. You were there. Tell us about the event that took place and the significance of that.
Right. The March of the Living is not a one-day event. In fact, thousands of people went to different places. Some people were this past several days in Warsaw, others in Krakow. I was in Budapest, and yesterday we actually had a march, and 5,000 people marched from the Great Synagogue, the Doheny Synagogue, which is one of Europe's largest synagogues in central Budapest, and we marched to the central train station of Budapest, and during the summer months. Yeah, the Kaleti train station. And during the summer months of 1944, about 550,000 Jews from the Hungarian community were marched to that train station and took a train directly from Budapest here to Auschwitz. And in fact, several hundred students, Hungarian students, actually took a train ride at the end of that march yesterday, a 12-hour train and sleeper cars all the way to Auschwitz today. But I want to tell you just a little bit about the march, because there was about 5,000 people that were parading down the central boulevard in central Budapest. And the only thing that crossed my mind was that to anybody that was watching or saw, was a spectator, it just looked like a pro-Israel rally, basically. And I think that most people watching would not know the significance of the 80-year history of the liquidation of the Jewish community there. And what was so interesting about it, and even unlike what we saw in this march, 5,000 people marching with Israeli flags, same spirit, down the central path in Budapest. There was not a singular protest. There was no protest whatsoever. It was probably the only capital in all of Europe where you could imagine that there wouldn't even be the slightest hint of any kind of hostile protest, anti-Israel protest at all.
How encouraging that must have been.
Well, not encouraging to think what would have happened if this march was taking place in London right now, or in Paris, or in New York. But
New York.
But a lot of credit to the people of Hungary, to the leadership of Hungary, for being a strong and important ally of the State of Israel. And even though Hungary has, like many countries in Europe, its own past with anti-Semitism today, we just didn't see it at all in that march yesterday.
I want to mention just briefly that joining us here today is an 82-year-old Holocaust survivor from Hungary. Her name is Marian Miller. She was born in Budapest in 1942. And during the ceremony itself, she's going to join an Israeli singer called Tal Sandak in performing a musical rendition of a poem that her cousin wrote the music for. Her cousin was only 13 years old when he was murdered on the edge of the Danube River. In addition to the mass gassings at Auschwitz-Birkenau of Hungarian Jews, tens of thousands were either shot to death on the banks of the Danube River or died en route to the death march to Austria. In fact, on the Danube River today, there is a very, very moving statue that is symbolic of when the Nazis and their Hungarian Arrow Cross collaborators held mass executions in Budapest between November 1944 and January 1945. Alex, I understand that this is something you looked at yourself.
Yeah, Erin, we were at a ceremony marking the shooting of, like you said, thousands of Jews right on the banks of the Danube. And there is a very poignant monument there of bronze shoes built into the wall that is right up on the edge of the Danube River.
And why shoes? Tell us why the shoes.
Because a lot of the Jews were asked to remove their shoes before
they were stripped naked. They were stripped naked before their executions, and the shoes are there as a reminder of these people who perished there, who were either shot or, even more horrifically, the Arrow Cross often went in the wintertime when the river was frozen solid. They drilled holes into the ice and they pushed through living human people, Jews, little kids, and they were forced to strip naked in that bitter winter cold, and all that was left along the banks were those shoes.
Some of them were even tied together, and there was the
victims.
Thinking there of the victims were tied together, and the thinking was that a Jew wasn't even worth a single bullet. So they would tie them together and then shoot one, and because they were tied together, when the one would fall in, so they would pull others with them to their deaths off the Danube River in 1944.
It's really inconceivable. What was it like for you to look? I've seen photographs of this sculpture. I've often wanted to see it, and I've studied very much about the history of Hungarian Jews. What was it like for you to stand there?
Well, there was a lot of very moving symbols in Hungary, but if you were there and you didn't know what it was and you look down, there's a little plaque, and the plaque says that this monument was there to commemorate victims that were killed by armed militiamen in 1944. So it doesn't even mention Jews, and it doesn't mention that they were killed by Hungarian Nazis. So, I think you have to understand the symbolism to know the history in order to take in, what you're seeing there.
Let's turn back to where we are today here in Poland. And again, the official ceremony is about to start. How many times have you visited here, and what have you found to be the most moving aspects of the official ceremony?
Well, this is the third March of the Living that I've participated on. And, here we are in Birkenau, and if you look behind me, it's something like 100 football fields worth of flat space where 1.1 million Jews were killed in a very short period of time. But just 3 kilometers away from here is the Auschwitz concentration camp. And many people have seen the concentration camp in movies, in historical videos, and it feels a little bit like a movie set. But the other thing that it feels like when you're walking around, and this is a feeling that I had already in my first time here in 2019, was that it feels like an Ivy League university campus. The way you have these brick buildings laid out among the grass, and you have the brick laying on the sidewalks, and just to see what's going on in the Ivy League university campuses today, and to feel that Auschwitz, feels viscerally, and again, this is a feeling I had way before October 7th. It feels like a university campus. So a strange parallel between what we're experiencing these weeks on university campuses and what took place over 80 years ago in Auschwitz.
It's interesting to point out that unless someone has visited here and unless they are aware of it, Auschwitz, it had originated as, the Nazis took over some Polish army barracks that were right outside of Auschwitz in Polish, which they then called Auschwitz. And the original buildings are still standing. Well, the Nazis refurbished and they renovated and they enlarged those barracks and for their purposes. But Auschwitz has been preserved as a museum. You can go into each building that you referred to, which are called blocks by number, and different blocks where medical experimentation took place or gassings. But Birkenau here is open. It's a place of contemplation. Don't you?
Correct, yes. So a lot of the buildings have been destroyed, and just about 100 meters to our side, you can see the concentration camps which were bombed. Yes, a lot of deep contemplation to think how many Jews died in such a small place in such a short period of time.
think the contrast between the two is also, I think it was well thought out. That here you can walk quietly where so many people were murdered, and especially the Hungarian Jews, in just the span of a few months. I mean, it's just shocking. Do you think that you can, until this day, truly comprehend the massive attempted genocide here?
I mean, it was more than an attempt. This was a systematic extermination of
They didn't
the Jewish
succeed.
people.
They didn't succeed,
They
but
succeeded to a
technically
large
you're
extent. I mean,
correct.
that's why we're celebrating here, commemorating here, and it's very hard to wrap your head around what actually took place here. You can come here many times, and you leave just as disturbed each time as the time before. And perhaps that's what draws me back to participate in this march again and again, because we can never forget. And what's so wonderful is to see more and more people recognizing the importance of studying this horrific moment in the history of the Jewish people, and realizing that if we don't learn what happened to us in the past, we will never be able to prevent it from happening again. About 3,000 people here today on the march. It's really a beautiful day here. I've participated in the march when it's been colder, when it's been raining, which I think is part of the experience that a lot of the Jews that suffered through the Holocaust had to go through the bitter winters of Poland. This year, because it's a leap year in the Jewish calendar and we have an extra month of spring, the Holocaust Memorial Day is actually taking place in early May. It's a beautiful spring day here, and I think that's part of what is contributing to the warm atmosphere among many of the participants.